Hello, and welcome to Lamplighters Backstage, a series of conversations with artistic and production staff about Lamplighters Music Theater's most memorable shows. I'm Jonathan Spencer, chair of the Gala Writers Committee and an actor with the company since 1990. And today I'm talking with Nicolas A. Garcia, director of Lamplighters' 2018 production of The Pirates of Penzance. That very same Pirates will be presented on July 19th as the premiere archival presentation of LMT Multimedia, the Lamplighters' new online streaming endeavor. Each month, we will be streaming new videos, podcasts, and archival videos of our award-winning productions of the Gilbert and Sullivan canon. Welcome, Nicolas.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks so much for sitting down with us today for our debut podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited. This is really a lot of fun, and we'll explain that in a second as well.
Absolutely.
First off, I think we should probably acknowledge to our audience that not only does the Pirates of Penzance play a rather significant role in your history with Lamplighters, but it also plays an important part in how we first met.
Absolutely. It was almost 20 years ago, I guess, that it was my first Lamplighters show. I was studying voice with Baker Peoples, and he suggested I audition for Lamplighters. He said it's something that every singer in the Bay Area should do at least once because the nature of the productions, the quality of the orchestra, the quality of the costumes, the quality of the set, it's a wonderful experience. And so he convinced me to audition. I auditioned for the company and got the role of Samuel in Pirates, and you were my pirate king.
Indeed, we were paired up. In fact, we commuted to rehearsals together.
Exactly.
It was 1998. It was 20 years to the date of the 2018 production. So
yeah.
About 22 now.
Goodness.
Isn't that exciting? How did that happen?
It's amazing what a different world we're in
exactly.
So many ways.
In so many ways. We'll get into that a little bit too, I'm
Absolutely.
sure, during the course of the interview. So you started there. Where did you go from there? What route did you take through the San Francisco arts community?
I had been starting with pocket opera, doing small roles there, and my career there grew into larger roles, and I expanded down to Opera San Jose, performing there, starting in the chorus and doing compromario roles in a few operas there, and just did the whole Bay Area circuit, Berkeley Opera when there was Berkeley Opera, Festival Opera, all over. And if it had the name opera in town, I was singing for them at some point. Then eventually I came back to Pocket Opera as the production manager and have in the last dozen years gone from the production manager to a stage director there to the associate artistic director, and now I'm the artistic director of Pocket Opera.
Fantastic. And what got you into directing after being a performer for so long?
Well, I had studied theater. Unlike most people in the opera world, I didn't have a music degree. I had a theater degree. So my training was in acting, directing, staging, set design. There were lots of different facets of theater that I was trained in that as an opera singer, I wasn't getting to, flex those skills. And I had come back to Pocket Opera after a little break, and Donald Pippin, who was the artistic director at the time and one of my great mentors in life, asked me if I would direct a one-act opera that I was in, called Bastien and Bastienne, which is a Mozart opera that Mozart wrote when he was 12, I think. And it's a charming piece, 3 singers, and so I staged it for Pocket Opera, and that was the beginning of learning, to direct professionally. And so I went on to direct, dozens of things at Pocket, directed at Sacramento Opera, then had a larger career as an assistant director at Opera San Jose, Michigan, San Diego Opera. So then I submitted my pitch for Pirates of Penzance to Lamplighters when Dennis Lichtai was the artistic director.
That's a really wonderful pitch, by the way. Dennis took the time to read it out loud to the spring fundraiser attendees, and I was in attendance that afternoon, and I thought this is going to be a fantastic production. I was really looking forward to it, and let's talk a little bit about what that pitch was. Tell us a little bit about your decision to try to view pirates through the lens of the new woman of the late 19th century.
It was a really fascinating movement. And it's funny, with everything going on now, there are a lot of things that I realized I was sort of woefully undereducated about in some parts of my life. We don't hear, you hear some about the suffragette movement, of course, but the new woman preceded that by, about 20, 30 years, and it was a movement of women's liberation. Women were wearing pants and riding bicycles and starting to break into the world of the male. They were studying in universities and starting to get career paths in very interesting fields. And at this point, theatrically, the work of Ibsen really plays a big role. Ibsen started creating characters, strong women who weren't punished for being strong. The trope in theater had always been that a strong, self-reliant woman who didn't need a man ends up dead or divorced or despondent or drunk or any one of a number of horrible punishments for daring to transcend the traditional world of the feminine. But Ibsen has them, living happily ever after as independent, strong women. And so it's a really fascinating time to explore the female in theater.
That's fantastic. And so Hedda Gabler, Nora in A Doll's House,
right.
and other roles were breakthroughs as well, and were commensurate with the late Victorian era?
Late Victorian era, whereas Pirates is set traditionally about 40 years before that. I bumped it to the late 19th century so that we could have all of Major General Stanley's daughters be new women, each in her own right, exploring a career path. One thing that always sort of bothers me, if you will, about a traditional... First, let me say that having seen Jane Hammett's Pirates, I knew that I could never direct a Pirates as perfect as that one was in the traditional vein. She had such a wonderful feel for how to make that operetta sing, and I just knew I couldn't compete with doing a version like that. So I had to explore a new way to present it that was authentic to something that I wanted to communicate. I mean, I saw her version and laughed hysterically and loved every minute of it, and I just thought, well, that's Pirates for you. So I needed to do some research and find where I wanted to take the piece. And of course, the country at that point was just beginning the Me Too movement, all the sort of sad and horrifying facts that were coming out about some of our role models in the media, in politics, and just tragic treatment of women, obviously throughout history and certainly in recent history. And so strong women were coming forward. They were telling their stories. And I didn't want the 12 Major General Stanley's daughters to be little cookie cutter versions of each other. Just sometimes in those big hoop skirts, they look like nothing so much as a really pretty cupcake. I mean, they just are a confection. And there's the pink one, and then the yellow one, and then the purple one, and then the lilac one. But there's no real distinct difference between any of them. They are just the girls. By making them into new women who are exploring the new women movement, they were studying meteorology, geology, photography, history, anatomy, and each young lady had her specialty. And it made for a really fun journey for each of these individual characters. Each chorus woman was so extraordinary at revealing what the journey of her character was and how the New Woman movement was affecting her.
Did it seem to grow out of Major General Stanley's knowledge of everything and all things military, etc.?
Well, that's exactly right. So, in the Major General's patter song, I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General, he lists every topic under the sun about which he knows a little something. And I figured that as he has espoused this his whole life, each of his daughters at some point took up one of his topics of interest and became an expert in it. So, he knows the battles of historical, and he knows the different kinds of rock formations, and so he has a daughter who's an expert in history, and he has a daughter who's an expert in geology. And actually during his aria, as he's doing all this education and listing all the things he's an expert at, each daughter comes forward and contributes by showing how she's sort of taken up this field of study.
So he's almost created a legacy of himself in 24 young ladies.
Exactly, and he has. It has made what could be a very stodgy character in the Major General suddenly a very progressive, brilliant man who sees that each of his daughters can take up some field and be more than just a cookie cutter girl who gets married to someone. And in particular, it was fun with the character of Edith, who I figured was his eldest daughter, who is sort of a mini major general, that she was so fascinated with military strategy and that she dressed like him, and he encouraged her to explore that side, and she dressed in a very sort of military, what would be considered masculine, uniformed sort of way, and she was one of the most fun characters to play with.
She had a pipe.
She had a pipe. She had a riding crop. She had a khaki outfit, and she saluted with the best of them. And she sort of led the girls, and she was studying the strategy of how to beat these pirates when they came around. It was brilliantly played by Melissa Sandy, and she came with a lot of ideas of how to create the character. And she turned out to be, each of the daughters was wonderful, but Edith was one of my favorites.
One of my favorite things about the women's chorus in this particular show was the fact that they didn't necessarily cower when the pirates entered the scene. In fact, they actually bested them at their own game.
And there's a moment when they normally see Frederick, and they are terrified, and they're hopping away on one foot because they've taken off their slippers. And instead, I have them, each of them holding their different shoe or boot or slipper, and they throw them at him because they're not having any of it. They say "Amen," and they throw and deck him with these dozen boots because they're not going to cower in front of anyone.
Now, obviously, this germ of an idea will lead places, and so it then takes you to their antagonists per se. The Pirates of Penzance, very iconic, very, very traditionally known by many audiences. How did you approach how they would deal with the new woman?
Well, ultimately, obviously, they would love them dearly. I think when you find out in the end that these were all noblemen who have gone wrong, then it sort of it makes sense. They're essentially fake pirates. That's why they're not terribly good at being pirates.
They don't make piracy pay.
They can't seem to make it pay, exactly. And so I think they left, the way I sort of justified it was that they left society because they didn't want to live in their traditional roles either. They were told that they were supposed to be noblemen who went into politics, who got regular jobs, who became bankers or became, or landowners or landed gentry, and they had this traditional role to play. And clearly, these dozen pirates, they left that life. They said, "Bye, England, I'm taking to the seas." So both choruses, the pirate chorus and the wards in Chancery, are both groups that have decided they don't want to conform to society's rules. And so it makes sense. It makes sense that if the pirates are going to come back and get settled down and get married, they would only get married to very non-traditional women. If you left your life to take to the high seas, you wouldn't come back to society just to be someone's husband, just to be settle down to a traditional life. You want a wife who's an archaeologist. You want a partner who's a geologist. You want to go exploring with them. You want to do some adventure with them. That made more sense to me.
And you, in the ways in which you portrayed the traditional chorus responses, against our wills, Papa, against our wills.
Well, exactly. I mean, I couldn't have a bunch of helpless women. They said, they've come to take your daughters, and normally the line is said like, "Against our wills, Papa," in a very sort of, helpless, getting tied to a train tracks kind of way. And our chorus women were like, "Against our wills, Papa, against our wills." Like, how dare they? How dare they try to do anything against our wills? And it brought, sort of the mood of the country at that point, right on the stage. I don't think there was a woman in the show that didn't appreciate having her character be strong and fierce. And even Mabel, who is the softest of them, perhaps the sweetest of them, and while all the other women are seen doing their activity, we just see Mabel sewing, and we think, oh, she's probably the most domestic of them, and she's just busy sewing while everyone else is, surveying the land and making maps and studying. But then when the swell of the women's chorus happens, we see what she's sewing, and they unfurl the banner, and it says, "We too deserve the vote."
Yeah.
And so it both harkens to the Me Too movement and says that she is a pre-suffragette. She's a suffragette about 20 years before there were. So she's a true trailblazer in women's rights also. So they all
you didn't save her for the big aria entrance either. You had her there the entire time.
The entire time. I didn't like the idea of Mabel not being a sister among sisters. I almost wanted you not to know which one was Mabel. That they're all, equally extraordinary young women, and Mabel doesn't just pop up out of behind a rock. I think she's been listening to Frederick's, plight the whole time he's expressing it, and she weighs what he has to say very thoughtfully. And she doesn't just make some flighty entrance and pop up and say, "Yes, one. Yes, I'll love you," from out of the blue. I wanted her to hear his whole song, his whole petition. Is there not one maiden here who will love me? And she listens thoughtfully, and I remember Baker said to me, "Well, she does have some pretty explosive coloratura, normally considered sort of flights of fancy." And I said, I don't think that's what it is. I think all that coloratura is in Frederick's head. I think he sees her, and he's so taken with her that when she says, "Yes, 'tis Mabel," in his head, he's singing Mabel. Like it's ringing in his head, but she just said, "Yes, 'tis Mabel." So she's looking at him like, what is this crazy boy going so over the moon for me, So she's much more practical, and it's Frederick who's the one who's hearing bells in his brain because she's, so wonderful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we delve further into the characters and their journeys, you also had a partner in this endeavor who was more in charge of the musical shaping of the show, in conductor David Drummond.
Extraordinary David Drummond.
His debut Lamplighters production. How did you and Maestro Drummond come to work together and collaborate in this show?
Well, David is an extraordinary collaborator, and we had worked together a few times at Pocket Opera. I had been looking for someone to music direct a show at Pocket, and I reached out to San Francisco Opera Center, the people at Merilla, where I had worked as an assistant director for the Schwabacher concerts. And so I reached out to Mark Borish, who's the head of music there, and I said, "Do you have anyone there who might be good?" And thinking that maybe he would have a young Merilla person or Adler fellow who was looking for work. And he actually recommended a world-class conductor, David Drummond, who just happened to have moved to the Bay Area a year or two before. And I believe he was the pianist for Debbie Voigt when she was doing her master class at Merilla, and that's how he knew her. So he put me in touch with David Drummond, and we met and got along famously. David was a conductor at the English National Opera, at Scottish Opera. I mean, was music director, I believe, on the Mikado with Eric Idle.
Yes, that's right.
In Great Britain. So just an extraordinary fellow with a deep well of knowledge. And he was always a great partner at Pocket because we challenge each other. He would say, "Well, the music is telling me this." And I'd say, "Well, dramatically, I need this. How can we get there?" And so we would sort of put our heads together and bring out the best in each other. So when the time came to do a show at Lamplighters, they said, "Well, is there anyone you want to work with as a music director?" And I said, "Well, if you're looking, we should have David Drummond because, he would fit like a glove around here." So he was an extraordinary collaborator and so thoughtful with the music and such a great communicator of what the music means and how to bring it out, and so good at working with individual singers. And
Absolutely, I experienced that as well.
He read my pitch and thought it was great, and the things that he found in the music that were part of my pitch that I didn't even know were. He's like he would bring out phrases and said, "Well, isn't that, doesn't that contribute to the direction we're going?" And I said, "By God, it does." He really was so insightful and a genius to work with on material like this, especially. It's nice having someone from Great Britain there to help. It just helps with the flavor of the whole piece in the end.
Absolutely,
a good Scotsman.
So we've got the team on top established, and yet there's much more. Theater's a team sport.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was most impressive, I thought, coming into the show was the decision in the costuming area. You've got these pirates who you said are casting off convention and expectation, and these women who are striving to bring new images of a new woman to the new century. How did costumer Miriam Lewis help you in establishing that?
Well, Miriam is another brilliant artist and a pleasure to work with. You know, I had been talking to Melissa Wortman, who's sort of the costume goddess at Lamplighters, about what I wanted to do with the show, just sort of generally pitching. And she mentioned it to Miriam, and Miriam actually said to Melissa, tell him I want to do it. I tell him I want in, because it was a great way to take a traditional piece and make a sort of an adventure out of it in terms of costuming. And I could not imagine in the end doing it with anyone else, because she came with research and images and ways to rethink things and ways to incorporate sort of new women costuming without taking away, from any of the beautiful femininity of the characters. She had wonderful pantsuit outfits on some of the women that were absolutely strong, and yet they were, women of their era. She would bring in vision boards that were covered in images of the new woman movement in its time. Women on roller skates, women on bicycles, women in careers, the hair, the outfits, people who got arrested for wearing things that were, not gender non-conforming. There was a lot of push against the traditional in this era, and Miriam really helped me bring that to the stage without it looking forced. I think she found a way to let the average audience member, who might not have a deep knowledge of the new woman movement, understand, oh, we're in a groundbreaking period here. Without having to read about it, they know, oh, these young women are a little different. They're pushing convention. And even the subtle things. She gave Mabel a costume that was in soft versions of the colors of the suffragette movement. The green and purple of the suffragette movement was part of Mabel's costume. So she was absolutely brilliant in how she brought my vision to life, and things I didn't even know I wanted.
So she had to create athletes, she had to create scientists, she had to create women of politics, she had to create women who had interests in both outdoors and indoors.
Yes, there was
tide pool explorers and fishermen.
Yes, not only in the sciences but we had athletes playing badminton and tennis on stage, and Kristen Avila, who played Kate, she saw the picture of one of the women in 1890s roller skates, and she said, I have a pair, please let me go on stage with them. And
how'd the orchestra feel about that?
Well, exactly. But just for safety's sake, I said, well, why don't you sling them over your shoulder when you make your entrance in Act 2, so that it's clear you were just roller skating.
Climbing over Rocky Mountains.
Exactly.
Roller
skating over Rocky Mountains in Act 1 probably wouldn't have made sense.
Did any of the cast members contribute that kind of way to your thinking and help create their costumes after you got them on them?
Absolutely. One of our chorus women, Bridget McGuire-Colton, is an avid birder. She is an expert on birds of prey.
She's a falconer.
She's a falconer, indeed. So naturally, I asked her to be the expert on birds. And Ilana Walder-Penzance is an avid fencer. Not only did she provide the foils, she provided the expertise in fencing when Edith is teaching Isabel how to defend herself in Act 2. Turns out Edith was not very happy with how Isabel was the one daughter who succumbed to the pirates, and so in Act 2 she's training her how to defend herself. So they are wearing full fencing gear at the top of Act 2, and Edith is going to teach Isabel how to be a strong fighter. And we had two extraordinary prop mistresses, Elisabeth Reeves and France Silcox, who were nominated for their work for Theatre Bay Area Awards. They came up with surveying gear and telescopes and also all manner of equipment.
Antique
cameras and something to check the weather. Yes, let's talk about the weather. So we had an expert on weather.
Anemometer.
Anemometer, exactly.
I think I got that right.
I believe you're correct. So, the stage was great to look at. I mean, between all the costumes and all the gear, it was fantastic. It was fantastic.
Well, what about the distaff side? What about the pirates? How were they brought into this new era?
I kind of left the pirates back in a more traditional. I think that if you're going to cast off society from being when you're a gentleman, nobleman who's gone wrong, you want the full pirate experience. So they were slugging grog and carrying chests. And had a blunderbuss. And
the reason I asked was because I was in a distressed tuxedo underneath my gear.
Yes, I did ask Miriam for a few touches that made it clear that if you looked closely enough, you would see that some of their costumes were what was left of their costume from when they were noblemen. She just had some subtle touches in there, especially the Pirate King, to make him look like a former nobleman turned pirate.
I got the impression that you ran over my pants several times with her car.
Yeah, that's probably that's the fun part of being a costumer, I think.
Exactly.
Can you distress this? Sure can.
Okay, well, we've studied a little bit about the costuming. How about the lighting design, the wigs and the makeup?
We had a terrific team all around. Brittany Mellerson, who's the resident lighting designer here at Lamplighters Music Theater. She has to come up with a lighting plot, and I don't know if our audience realizes the challenge of this, to come up with a lighting plot to make the show look consistent in 4 different theaters with a week to load into each one. It is an all but impossible experience for our lighting designers, and Brittany was extraordinary. She was brilliant in getting the show to look the same in 4 different theaters. The golden sunlight of the grotto in Act 1 and the shadowy green depths of the abandoned chapel in Act 2. And then Miriam talked to Carrie Ryder-Kuhn, who's our wig designer, about what she wanted for this hair. I wanted very sensible. I wanted as few wigs as possible on the women, in fact. I think there were more wigs on the pirates than on the women.
I can attest to that.
Exactly. You had a big,
I think I had a
curly
combination of 2, actually.
Yeah, I think you had quite a coiffure on you as the Pirate King. But for the most part, I wanted the women to have as much natural hair as they could. Instead of the sort of big, frilly, bouncy little Bo Peep curls on everyone, I wanted very sensible hair. And she and Carrie designed a look that made a lot of sense with what we had going on.
How about your makeup design?
David Kirby was our makeup designer and has been with Lamplighters for quite a while. And he did a brilliant job. I think the most fun for Carrie and David both had to be the character of Ruth.
I was just about to bring Ruth up, so let's use that as a moment to talk about
Sure.
Ruth. Yeah.
Ruth is traditionally treated like an old hag. If you're going to do a show about women's agency and power and women having the strength that they have been denied for centuries, you can't have a show with jokes about what an old hag Ruth is.
She's a very complicated figure, isn't she?
She is a complicated figure, and she deserves better than just old lady jokes.
Yeah.
Especially since she's an old lady of 47 years. And at the time I was directing the show, I was 45. So it was sort of an affront that to have this line, 47 year. Well, geez, that's not very old. And so I really wanted to treat Ruth like a 47-year-old woman, at sea for a long time, sure, and somewhat the worse for wear, probably not taking a lot of care of herself because she's taking care of all these pirates and raising Frederick. And so Ruth experiences a new woman transformation of her own. She starts Act 1, as being spurned and rejected by Frederick, and she runs off. And one should feel for her. And so what happens in intermission, I took the 2 women playing Ruth, Deborah Rosengaus and Gwendolyn Kuhlman, when we had a long talk, and I said, here's what happens to Ruth between Act 1 and Act 2. She runs off to the Cornish coast, and she walks into a pub, and she meets a dazzling saloon girl there who's working, and the saloon woman says, well, of course you're not getting, you haven't taken care of yourself. Look, why don't you do some you time? Why don't we give you a little fresh haircut and a new color? And so whereas all the other women were fiercely entering the world of the male, Ruth was embracing her femininity. She experiences a complete 180, and when she comes back in Act 2, Frederick's jaw drops to the floor with what a knockout she has turned herself into. It was something of the transition of Sandy at the end of Grease, which normally I would, say, a woman is not going to change for a man. But since we had so many women fiercely independent, I wanted Ruth's character to be someone who is taking the step to own her sexuality and femininity and what a bombshell 47-year-old she is. Yeah. And she comes back with, a completely different hair and makeup. And I know Carrie and David and Miriam all had a lot of fun doing this unique transformation for Ruth in Act 2. And the audience, I know, reacted very strongly with, in favor of her breakout change. I don't think anyone in our show is the same person at the end of Act 2 as they are in Act 1, except for perhaps the sergeant, who is, consistently the law.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the law. Let's talk about the authority figures.
Well, I had studied in college a lot of film noir. The subtextual project of all of the film noir movies is to turn the namby-pamby man into a dominant male figure so that he fulfills his traditional role, and to turn the too strong woman into a tamed creature. And one of the devices in all of these movies to do that is the law. There's always a cop or a policeman who represents helping them get this order in their life. And so to have these law figures in Pirates of Penzance, when everyone is bucking their traditional roles, the only thing that you can do with them is to make them the law bumbling. I mean, it was the one thing that didn't need too much changing for my vision, because these Keystone Cop, foolish, bumbling policemen were ideal for what I wanted. I wanted the law that forces people into these traditional roles to be ineffectual and foolish and bumbling. Everyone in Pirates of Penzance flouts the law in their way. The noblemen flout the law by leaving their responsibilities and becoming pirates. The women flout the law by studying things they're not supposed to and entering occupations they're not supposed to. Everyone is breaking the rules of tradition. Ruth becomes a 47-year-old bombshell. Edith is a cross-dresser. Everyone is doing something they're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And having the law played by the most deadpan brilliance of Charles Martin is fantastic, because he almost goes into everything, the sort of stone-faced and just reciting what the law is supposed to be and trying his best to fulfill the law. But, he's got a soft heart in the end. Even the law buckles. It ended up working perfectly with the design of the characters of the show.
Well, let's talk a little bit about our romantic leads. So we have Frederick and we have Mabel, and you've talked a little bit about them individually. How about when they come together? What is that? What impediments or obstacles were in your way to have a new lens on them?
Well, in the end, I think an audience needs to see a couple that they're rooting for. So I knew that it was still love at first sight. I think by having Mabel be stronger and individualized and a suffragette, it really makes sense for Frederick to fall instantly in love with her. I mean, she gets to fall in love with him because I had her on stage for the whole opening. She gets to fall in love with him because she listens to his earnest pleas when he says, is there no one who will love me? And he sings a whole aria about what he's looking for and why he needs love in his life. And so she has a reason to fall in love with him. She hears him. Why does he fall in love with her? Well, normally it's because she's really pretty. Well, now he gets to fall in love with her because she's strong, independent. She is someone who flouts convention. So it was less about having obstacles for them and more about having genuine reasons for them to fall in love with each other.
And when Mabel has to turn on him, you have new motivations.
Absolutely. I mean, she is as compelled by, she says, he has his duty and I have mine. And I gave her 2 pistols at that point because I did not want her to just be resigned. If she understands why he has to, follow the rules and go back to his indentures because the contract states that he, has to serve until his 22nd birthday. She is going to defend her sisters and not let anything bad happen to her father, and she picks up pistols and goes and gets ready to fight. When you have performers who are as thoughtful and sensitive and smart as the ones we cast, it makes it easy. I mean, I come in with some ideas, and then I pitch ideas to them, and then they take them and run. We had Mike Denoyers and Carmelo Tringali as the Fredericks, and each of them brought something a little different. There was a real earnestness and sincerity and vulnerability in Carmelo, and there was a ardent quality and a passionate quality in Mike Denoyers, and so each performance was slightly different. And our Mabels, Erin O'Mealy and Julia Mulholland, each brought something different as well. There was a fierceness to Erin O'Mealy and a tenderness to Julia Mulholland that shaped how each different performance would go. I mean, they made choices that were right for them and their version of the Mabel that I came up with.
And now we're going to get to something that's rather special to me, which is a discussion of Major General Stanley and the Pirate King, often considered among the most recognized characters in the show and perhaps in all of the GNS canon. What opportunities did you see walking into the casting and the rehearsals of those roles? And when I say often, I mean frequently.
Yes, often. Not a person who has lost his parents.
That's true.
I explicitly said in my pitch that for all the innovation and change that I wanted in all these other elements, I would never undermine a classic character like Major General Stanley and the Pirate King. I think Gilbert and Sullivan created definitive characters there, and all you have to do, much in the way that Mozart and Da Ponte create characters in the opera repertoire that are, if you just look at the page, if you look at the notes on the page and you look at the text, it's all there. And I think that is very true of the Major General and very true of the Pirate King. And I loved their relationship. I love that they had such utter respect for each other. And one wouldn't think, that these brigands and this very regimental fellow would get along, but it turns out the Pirate King is not a very good brigand, and the Major General is not a terribly effective, military man. They're both soft gentlemen at heart, and Lamplighters has, a deep wealth of performers who have covered both those roles. But I was very fortunate to have you audition for us, and I just think your Pirate King is brilliant.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think first of all, you sing the pants off it, and I think the whole rehearsal process, you sang the aria brilliantly, and then during Tech Week, you started adding the high G, the optional high G at the end of the aria, and I was like, yay!
David asked me to save it.
Yeah, just save it. I'm fine with saving it, but that Pirate King was just, it gave me goosebumps every time, and people who know you, Jonathan, know that you're just a softie at heart, but your Pirate King can be terrifying. I mean, he can be cool and scary. When he comes back in Act 2, the strength with which he's going to enforce this contract is unmistakable. And although you love him, you understand why Frederick is cowed into returning to his place. The Pirate King is no joke.
And of course you have Lawrence Ewing, the ultimate tool in the box.
Exactly. I mean, when in doubt, bring Lawrence. I loved our Act 2 Dream Ballet. You have someone who is a trained dancer in Lawrence Ewing, who's a wonderful patter man and a brilliant actor. You can't go wrong. I knew how I wanted that Dream Ballet to go. I knew I literally wanted it to be a dream. I wanted him to fall asleep on stage, and I knew how I wanted it to start. I knew what I wanted it in the middle, and I knew how I wanted it to end. But I'm not a choreographer. And so I asked Kristen Avila, who's our dance captain in the show. She and Nicholas Dahlman both were our dance captains. And so she went home and came back the next day and created my vision. She plucked it out of my head and put it on the stage. And so the pirates all swoop Major General Stanley up and dance with him. And it's his struggling with his conscience and struggling with, and in the second verse, struggling with what's right, the law, versus his sympathy with the pirates. And then Lawrence does a twirl in the middle where his nightshirt just blooms out and then tucks it down like Marilyn Monroe over the steam grate. And the audience died every time. I mean, it was one of the funniest moments I've ever directed, and it just come from having brilliant people around me.
And it really starts the engines on the finale too.
Right.
I mean, it really does.
Right. From there, from that point on, it's breakneck speed until the end. Big sword fight, a big revelation, a big finish, and then bows. You know,
and a lovely photograph at the end.
Yeah, and then the photograph button. Because that particular moment of that button on the song with everyone getting their picture taken together was such a symbol of leaping into the future. It was such a symbol for what happens next to all these characters. They launch into the next century. They launch into the 20th century as modern men and modern women. And this is the picture that sort of they'll look back on with their grandchildren and say, oh, that was the end of that old era and the beginning of an era of a new women and new men, frankly, that have to go with them.
Absolutely. Well, obviously this was a joyful experience for you, both professionally and personally. What will you take away from that pirate production and bring to your future work?
I think the sense of collaboration, the sense of teamwork. I have directed a few, larger scale productions like at Sacramento Opera, but never at a place that also felt like family. And Lamplighters is as much a professional theater company, it is also a family. And I think creating that sense of trust in each other, on the trust to bring ideas forward, trust to collaborate, never to be proprietary about an idea, sort of in my school of thought, and what certainly was exemplified in this production is the best idea wins. So people came forward with contributions, and I stayed hopefully humble enough to be teachable and say, yes, that's even better than my idea. Let's put that in. And I think that's the way to go through theater, and man, that's the way to go through life. I think that's something that I'll take with me in my professional world and my personal world. Be teachable, be a good collaborator, play well with others.
There you go. Well, this is not going to be the end of your experience here at Lamplighters. Unfortunately, the pandemic and the shelter-in-place temporarily has postponed another collaboration with you and David Drummond for the coming season, which has been postponed to next year, to 2021. Tell us a little bit about what's ahead.
So Iolanthe was going to be our collaboration this summer in August of 2020. Hopefully it will be our production in August of 2021. It's a beautiful piece, a very sincere, heartfelt piece that I'm trying to put a little bit of a twist on as well. There is Act 1, which is in Arcadia, idealized and perfect. And then Act 2, we're back in London. And I have asked if we could reset Act 2 in London of the Blitz. I think it's going to have a lot more resonance now, because the idea is everything before a moment in history and everything after a moment in history. And you can hide in Arcadia all you want, but at some point you come back to the real world and there's bombs dropping and people wearing gas masks, and in this case, a global pandemic. But I think, keep calm and ferry on is going to be our slogan. But I think it's going to be a very impactful show. I think, I won't make it too gimmicky, but I think it will really resonate for everyone, because our lives before this shelter in place was a lot more ideal than we realized. It was a more innocent time, and there's going to be the real world that comes after it is going to be a vastly different world.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. Well, something to look forward to and something for you to muse on in your captivity,
Absolutely.
as it were.
Yes.
I want to thank you so very much for taking the time to come here and sit down with us at a distance. We are at a distance,
ladies and
gentlemen.
We are a good 8 feet apart at least.
We're at least 8 feet apart.
Yeah.
And how delightful it was to revisit this wonderful production, which we shared so much joy and bringing it to the audience.
Absolutely.
A reminder now that the 2018 production of The Pirates of Penzance, directed by Nicolas A. Garcia, will be available for at-home streaming on July 19th for a limited time through LMT Multimedia, the Lamplighters' new online programming endeavor. Each month we will be streaming new videos, podcasts, and archival performances. These features and broadcasts are debuting in July as a free preview, and starting in August, you can continue through a Patreon membership for future streams of productions including our award-winning New Mikado, set in Renaissance Italy, and The Yeoman of the Guard. Thank you for listening to Lamplighters Backstage. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like more behind-the-curtain content, please join our Patreon at lmt.lamplightersorg/Patreon. Find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram at LamplightersMT, as in music theater, and on Facebook at Lamplighters. Take care, and remember to say often, frequently, only once.